Welcome to Conversations. My name is Amy Adams. I'm the editor of Conscious Life Space and the broadcaster of this podcast. Welcome to Conversations, episode 4. I'm very excited today to share with you this conversation with Julie Creffield. She is a blogger, author, motivational speaker, and no BS coach. We talk about being judged, identity, big fat stupid goals, an active lifestyle, and her blog, Too Fat to Run, the Fat Girl's Guide to Running. Before we get started, I just have one quick announcement. Did you know that Conscious Life Space offers a free course, 7 days towards gratitude? You don't even have to sign up on the mailing list. That's crazy. Everyone makes you sign up on the mailing list, but not for this. It's a free course, free forever, given from me to you from the bottom of my heart. That's my way of expressing my gratitude to you for being here. Now let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Today I am going to have a discussion with Julie Creffield. She is an author of 8 books and is the woman behind a movement called Too Fat to Run. So welcome today to the podcast Conversations, Julie.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So first I wanted to ask you, how did you, first of all, the name is great, Too Fat to Run, but how did this whole movement begin? What was the inspiration behind it?
Sure. So initially when I first started running, it was absolutely to kind of deal with weight gain, so I started running to try and get on top of my weight. And I believed that if I run enough, then I'd lose enough weight to feel good about myself. But I found it really difficult in the early days to run with any amount of confidence because I didn't see any other runners that looked like me. And I was quite anxious about running in public just in case people laughed at me, and it was difficult to get clothes in my size, and there wasn't anybody that looked like me on magazines, so it was a really kind of lonely space really. So I was running quite unsuccessfully for a few years, and then I'd been running for a while and I'd taken part in a few races, and I kind of kept thinking, if I do more races, then I'll feel like a proper runner. And that never really happened. And then I came last in a race. And when I got to the finish line had been packed up and everybody had gone home.
Oh my goodness.
It was really embarrassing, but also it was kind of a turning point for me. I was a little bit angry. I was like, I paid my money to do this race just like everybody else, and I wasn't overly slow. So I was just a little bit peeved really. So I went home and I started up a blog, which was called The Fat Girl's Guide to Running. And it was all about kind of charting my journey in the running world. It was still very much from a weight loss point of view. And I just figured if I wrote about my experiences, it would make me more accountable, and maybe I'd run more and eat better and all of these kind of things. So that was initially what it was about. And it didn't take long really for people to say, oh my God, thank you for writing this. I thought I was the only one. And I realized that there were overweight runners all over the world feeling exactly like I did, not having anybody to talk to about these issues, feeling completely underrepresented in the sport, having really awful things happen to them. And it just became this kind of safe space for me to write my honest views on what it felt like to run in a bigger tkind normal body. But in the early days, it was very much anonymous. I didn't have any photos of me. I didn't use my name. It was, very kind of secretive. And then, after a couple of years, I decided to turn it into a business. And at that point, I realized that I couldn't be anonymous anymore, and I had to be the kind of face of the brand, really. So yeah, it happened. It grew very organically, and I never set out for it to be a business or even for it to be a movement, really, because in the early days it was all about me. It was a very kind of selfish blog. It was like, these are my experiences. Whereas later on it became more about the running industry and about plus size fitness more generally, and it became a little bit more kind of political.
So how did you feel, though, when you made the transition from this kind of personal, anonymous space into the public realm? I mean, what were the kind of emotions that you experienced with that?
Yeah, I mean, I was really worried about getting trolled. I was really worried about kind of what my like real friends would think about me writing so explicitly about my fears and insecurities about my body. I just had heaps of worries about being judged, and that people would, you know, I still feel this. I still feel that there's probably lots of people out there that just go, oh, shut up, go and lose some weight and stop moaning. You know, I think there's kind of, you know, still this kind of backlash around kind of anything to do with plus size women being bold and being proud, and, you know, not succumbing to this idea of what a woman should look like or how they should behave. So I still have that as a kind of undercurrent to what I do. You know, I still have insecurities when I send out a blog post that's particularly provocative. You know, and I would say that particularly in the UK, you know, I have got a lot of love and respect for the running world, but I still think that my work rubs people up the wrong way a little bit, and that I'm sure many running agencies or people would prefer that the Two Factor Run movement didn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I practice yoga, and I actually just started something myself to make a little public, and I've had a lot of fear over doing this because I'm showing myself in a way that is I've never done before. I mean, usually on social media, it's like from my here up, and then I don't show the below. And so I completely get that, and it's very scary. I mean, and I think that there's just probably more people like that than not. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think as women, what we tend to do is we crop ourselves. We use, you know, social media and even just normal photography. You know, we have found a way over the years of cropping ourselves to only show the bits of us that we are happy showing. And I really completely understand the reasons why we do that. But I think one of the reasons that the Two Factor Run brand grew so quickly and has got so many real kind of fans is that for the first time, women were looking at photos of me that were not particularly flattering, that were not airbrushed, that were, you know, I wasn't always wearing matching kit or a face full of makeup. And women were going, oh my God, that's what I look like. That's what I look like when I go running. Red, with lumps and bumps, often with my tummy showing, you know, and it was refreshing for women to go, that is the reality of what running looks like for a larger than normal body. And there was, you know, there's been, when I first started writing, in the UK at least, there wasn't a plus size fitness scene. There were no other real bloggers talking about plus size fitness other than in a kind of weight loss way. And I know in the States, you know, they were kind of slightly ahead of us. But we had, a few years ago, we had this model, this plus size model on the front of a UK running magazine. And people were going, oh my God, it's great, we're making progress. And I was like, are we really? I mean, she looks beautiful, she looks gorgeous, there's not a hair out of place, there's not a drop of sweat. Is that really what we look like? So yes, it's great, there's a little bit of body diversity, but is it realistic? No. Does it kind of add to our pressures and worries about kind of looking a certain way when we exercise? Absolutely. You know, because the reality is a lot of girls, teenage girls, drop out of sport because of the fear of how they look. And then what happens is we morph into these kind of 40, 50, 60-year-old women who have been out of sport for such a long time because of those fears that were put in place so young. You know, so I think imagery in sport is so important for women.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you talk about how the teenage girls, because I actually remember so clearly, I don't know why this really sticks in my mind, but I remember being at a ball field. And at that time, the boys and the girls of the same age all played together. There was no thing about the girls on the side and just the boys playing. But then there was this time where all of a sudden some of the girls started to drift off to the side and they didn't want to play anymore. And they were going to be the observer or the cheerleader and not the participant. And I remember that so clearly. And I think about that now. And I think about, I hope things have been changing for younger people. I think it has, because they do make a little more availability for sports teams. I think women's sports have become more organized over the years. But that really just still gets to me, because I don't think a lot of it has changed, and it's mainly because we've become like objects instead of people.
Yeah, and I think there's also a kind of a difference between playing sport and just being active. So I think a lot of people, particularly women, grow up believing that the only reason to do exercise is to look good, to lose weight, you know, and for many women, particularly after they've had children, it's not about those things. It's more about getting time away from the house. It's about being able to achieve goals. It's about kind of managing your physical and your mental health, having space, being able to create kind of new friendships and relationships, having a social life. So playing sport is quite prescriptive. It's about being in a team or going to training or achieving like goals, winning, which I feel is very kind of male kind of energy. Whereas I think for women, we just want to take part. We don't have to be great. We just want to be able to do yoga, go and go for a hike. It's very different, I feel, to the male way of doing sport.
Yes,
whereas, you know, if you're not good, there's no point in playing.
Right.
You know, and I think for women, you know, it's so important. You know, in the UK, there was a study that was done by the government a few years ago, which revealed that 2 million fewer women played sport than men because of the fear of judgment. You know, and so I've recently just done a TEDx about this, because, you know, my point is, if women are not playing sport because of judgment, what else are they not doing? You know, and if you think that the link between sport and just physical health alone, you know, there was another report in the UK that said that lack of physical activity was as dangerous to your health as smoking. You know, so if women are not doing these things because of the fear of how they look, they're putting their lives at risk just because of what other people may or may not think about them. You know, so it's critical to female health that we get over ourselves, that we stop caring so much about what we look like, what our physical appearance looks like, and just get on with really kind of moving forward with how we feel and how exercise makes us feel. And, you know, it really worries me that there are so many women out there that go, oh, you know, I couldn't possibly wear lycra, or, you know, what would my neighbours think if I went out for a run or a walk? You know, it really kind of upsets me that we are putting our physical health and our mental health at risk because of this fear of judgment.
Yeah, I get that, because I have the same thing. I mean, I actually practice yoga at home. I don't go to a studio or anything because I don't really want to. I mean, now I'm actually feel a little more fit and better, and I can touch my toes, so it's not a problem. But there was a time where I couldn't.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it's about a process, and I think that's why communities like mine are really interesting, because initially women come to me and they say, oh, you know, I don't want to run with a running group. I don't want to go to these kind of organised events. I'm too scared. I'm too self-conscious. And then after a few months of being in my groups, you know, posting, getting coaching, getting support, sometimes they'll go, do you know what? I'm ready now. I'm ready to go and join my local running club. And I'm like, great. You know, it gives me so much joy when a woman turns around and says, I don't need you anymore. I'm okay. And they go off. Like, you know, I am not offended by that at all, because that to me is a massive win, to be able to go out and play sport in a really kind of visible way.
So when you started running, when you decided that you wanted to do this for fitness, did you start by like walking and running and doing something like that, or just going all out and trying?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, back then, I can't ever remember reading a magazine or having a website. There were not mobile phone apps, you know, we're talking like close to 20 years ago. I didn't know how to start running. So all I did was go out the front door and try. So there would have been lots of walking, but I wasn't following a walk-run plan or a couch to 5K program. I was literally just going out. And I used to do this thing that was very much led by shame. So if there were people in the street, I'd run for as long as I could. And as soon as there was no one watching, I'd walk. You know, and actually for the first few years, I probably couldn't run a 5K without stopping, you know, for at least the first 5 or 6 years, because my fitness never improved, because I wasn't running with other people. I was only kind of following my own plans. You know, I had nothing really to hold me to account. It was only really when I started training for a marathon and I realized that I didn't want to run a marathon. I wanted to be able to run the majority of it. And I started training with a running club. It was only when I started running with other people that I started to run consistently, you know, to be able to run for an hour, 2 hours without having to walk.
Right. So how long did it kind of take you to get to the point where you decided that you wanted to do a marathon? I mean, first you're making this like choice to go ahead and run and get more fit. And then what was the thing that turned you on to that? Because I mean, a marathon is a long, long distance. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was very much that I kept saying like, right, let me do a 5K, and a 5K will push me to train. And then it was like, no, well, that didn't work. Let me do a 10K, and that will definitely make me want to train. And then I didn't train properly. And then it was half marathon. And I kept up in the distance, believing that A, it would make me skinny, and B, it would make me enjoy the sport of running and run more frequently. And none of those things happened. So the marathon was the ultimate goal. And I also believed that because people were watching what I was doing from afar, I had this feeling that people were thinking, yeah, she's not a proper runner because she's not done a marathon yet. And obviously a marathon's just a step too far. So there was definitely an element of being able to prove my critics wrong. You know, and when I did finally do my marathon in 2012, I had lost quite a bit of weight just because the training does that to you. But I was still a pretty big girl. But I run 90% of that race, you know, and I was even shocked myself. I can remember getting to 16 miles, which is quite a significant point in the London Marathon. It's just after Tower Bridge, which is the iconic part of the race. And I can remember kind of about 16 miles feeling physically sick because I couldn't believe I'd run for 16 miles without having to stop. I was like, oh my God. And I almost shocked myself, and I had to walk to kind of control my nerves because I was like, oh my God, I've just run 16 miles without taking a single step. You know, and it was a real kind of revelation to me that you can do these things, you know, set your mind to it. And it's, you know, when it's a real kind of head thing to go, well, you know, when I first started, I couldn't run for more than 5 minutes without stopping. And here I am being able to run for 2.5 hours without taking a single step. And it's, you know, I use a lot of metaphors in my books about kind of what marathons teach you, but it's about kind of this exponential growth, this leap from one place to the next. And if you can do that in sport, you can do it in business, in relationships, and, you know, these things that you can't even picture for yourself at the beginning. You have to have kind of blind hope and blind faith that by some means you will grow into the person that does those kind of things.
Yeah. Do you think that like your belief system has something to do with that too, though? That do you have to kind of dig down and believe in yourself as well as, I mean, you can kind of have this, I guess the blind faith is a deep down belief, but I guess my question is like, what do you think though is the motivation to that? I mean, like, what's behind it?
Yeah, so I think a lot about this because I don't always do the training that I should do for these big challenges that I do. But I have something that is kind of, people say that marathons are a physical thing. I don't think they are. I think they're purely mental. They're a mental challenge. Yes, you have to put the training in, you have to be able to cover the distance and all of those things. But if you are weak of mind, then you'll just give up. You'll just get to a point in training where you go, this is too difficult. I can't believe that I could ever do it. You know, there'll be points where you will go from, you know, running, you know, I don't know, you'll go out for your longest run, which will be 20 miles or something like that. And to get your head around how long that takes, and it's not even in a race setting. So you haven't got people cheering you on. You've got no toilets. You've got to do this all by yourself. That takes a lot of kind of strength, kind of mentally. And I think I'm driven by two things, and I kind of write about this. I think I'm driven by shame and fame. So I love being able to prove people wrong and to be able to go, hey, I just did this awesome thing. And to have people go, oh my God, you're so amazing. You're so amazing. And I hold my hands up that drives me, you know, and it probably comes from, you know, I'm one of 6 children, and growing up, I was a bit of a show off because I was desperate for attention. So I still have that in me. Like, I want to do these incredible things so people go, oh, you know, Julie, she's great. She does these amazing inspirational things. That drives me. I'm not going to lie. That does drive me. And the other thing that drives me is shame. I would hate to say I'm going to run a marathon and then not do it, because the shame of that would really cripple me. I would feel really embarrassed. saying I'm going to do something and then not do it. So that kind of really drives me to kind of get out of bed when I don't want to get out of bed, and to endure the pain, and to have to give up alcohol and all the other things that come with running a marathon.
Yeah.
But they're equivalent in my business. You know, when I say I'm going to write a book, you know, the way my process for writing books is I say I'm going to write it, and I put it up on Amazon before I've even written a single word. And it's that kind of, it's that drive of, God, I better write it because people have already paid for it, or they're already expecting it to be out. I've told the world it's happening. Like, you know, that's what drives me in my business as well.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So you put up your book before I mean, I've heard that happen with courses, but I didn't even know with a book that you could do that. So that's
so I mean, I've always kind of put it on Amazon before it's quite ready, but actually last year I took it to a whole new extreme. So in October we find out whether we've got a place for the London Marathon. So it's a thing that happens every year, and everyone panics and goes, oh my God, I've got a place, what am I going to do? So in October last year, loads of women were saying, oh, I've got a place for the London Marathon. Can you help train me? And have you got a book on marathon running? And I was like, no, I haven't got a book on marathon running. I was like, but I will have. So literally, I think it took me 28 or 29 days to get the book from idea into people's hands. So I literally just spent a month. I put it up on Amazon. It went to like the bestseller in the running charts within 2 days. You know, I'd had like 1,000 people kind of order it on pre-order. And then that was the motivation to sit down and write it. And actually it's been my best book. It's had the best reviews. I read through it sometimes and go, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this book, because it's great. It's like a Bible of running. And so it's called The Fat Girl's Guide to Marathon Running. And even women who have no intention of running a marathon have really enjoyed reading the book, because it talks about the psychology and how I do things, and it's very applicable to other parts of your life. And women say, maybe one day I might, because they've now read this book.
That's great. I mean, it must feel very good, though, to have that kind of feedback from people, too, that they've been inspired and that you're making a difference in their lives. I mean, that's
absolutely
incredible. So you're like almost like their spectator, cheering them on in a way. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something, I don't know. I mean, if any of the listeners have ever been to a race to watch people crossing the finish line, I think that's a huge event. I loved, one of my best experiences as a spectator was watching a girl who did a triathlon. That was, a whole other craziness. But it was the first time I had ever been to one. And she was falling down. I mean, she was literally falling down on the ground, and she was I could cry thinking about it. It's like so crazy, but I mean, everyone was just going crazy, screaming, and she did it, and you just felt like, oh my God, it's so incredible. So sorry, I'm emotional about it, but that's what that kind of, it's like, that somebody works so hard.
Yeah.
Here they are, and they've done it. So that must
it's it is rewarding, and I think it's a real shared experience. I really agree with you. Being a spectator of sport opens up your eyes to the human experience, and actually in some countries, because I've run all over the world, in some countries it's not the same. So in the UK, definitely in the UK, we cheer for the underdog. We cheer for the people at the back. But I've been in other countries in Europe where if you're at the back, you're pretty much ignored by the crowds. The crowds are not interested in the people at the back. They're interested in the people at the front. So that's quite interesting. But I think there is this thing as a spectator where you see yourself in those people and you think, God, if that was me running, how would I feel? And, I always get emotional at the end of marathons when people are standing there cheering you on, calling you out by your name. They're there willing you on. They're complete strangers, but they still want you to do your best.
Right.
And I think there's something magical about this collective experience of mass sporting events where you don't know people and you still cheer them on anyway.
Yeah. It gives you a little hope in humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how did you translate, so you do coaching now? Do you coach groups or do you coach one-on-one? And is it directly running, or is it like through a broader spectrum of things?
A bit of all of those, actually. So initially, I coached women in groups to do running stuff. So we'll have groups to get people up to 5k, or groups that are about marathon training or improving your speed, and it's normally done in a group setting, all done virtually. I don't do hardly any in-person training, so it's all done via the power of the internet and Facebook groups and video and stuff like that. But actually a lot of women were saying, I have an online running club. Women were, we talk about all sorts of things in that running club, and women would post about things that were not running related, and I would be jumping in wanting to help them with their lives, so it might start off as a running problem. It might be like, my husband doesn't get that I want to run, and so yes, that's a running thing, but actually it's more to do with that lady's boundaries in her relationships, or how she expresses what she wants, so there are all these other things. And my background has always been in helping people. I started my career working with young people, and then I've worked with older people around volunteering, so it's always been about helping people transition from one part in their life to another, one place to another. And I was thinking, within the running context, I can't help people in the way I want to just under the running banner. And also a lot of women were approaching me going, I'm not overweight and I'm not a runner, but I just love you and I just want to work with you. How can I do that? And I had nothing to offer them. Now, I have a concept that I use called big, fat, stupid goals, which is what my marathons always were. But I could apply them to anything. So any goal that a woman desperately wanted to do, I could apply the principles to and help them achieve it. So I started a program called Big, Fat, Stupid Goals. And that is where my kind of life coaching practice came out of, really. So we piloted that group with around 12 women, and their goals were anything from writing a children's book to doing their first triathlon, or leaving their husband, or it could be any of those big things that we kind of want. So now I pretty much run two businesses. I run the Two Factor Run work, which is all about running, and I run a coaching practice that's all about living a bigger life. Sometimes they cross over. So I'm doing a program at the moment called 100 Ways, which is about 100 ways to ditch the dieting kind of way of living. So that kind of involves the joyful movement and fueling yourself properly, but it's also stuff around self-management and having big goals and kind of being self-aware and stuff like that. So it kind of merges the two. But I take on one-to-one clients, not many, because I find the group settings really help, because actually it's that shared experience where women say, a big realization in my groups is that women have just been putting everybody else first before them, or that they've lost sight of what they actually want. So many women say, I don't know what I want. I have no idea what I want, which makes me so sad that women can't even describe what they want from life anymore. At what point did they stop wanting stuff for themselves? So my coaching work is all done virtually. I've got clients from all over the world, and it's always about kind of that shared experience and setting personal and collective goals, and supporting each other. I mean, the support that goes on in my group between absolute strangers initially is incredible. And women, travel across the globe to go and spend time with each other from my coaching groups, which just lights me up. It's awesome. It's awesome. And there's always an open door when people are traveling for races and things like that. We do meetups, and it's just a wonderful community of women.
Yeah. So, okay, sorry. There was so much in there. I was trying to figure out, which I had a couple of things going on that I was like froze, because I was like, now what? Because, okay. So I totally get that. I love the internet and this idea of community. And there is something that happens that, of course, there's once in a while, there's somebody, I think sometimes even when I participate in community in groups, I sometimes hold back a little bit sometimes, or I feel like, oh, am I overstepping my boundaries? Maybe they don't really want my help. But sometimes I just said, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there anyway. If they don't feel good about whatever my input is, they'll tell me. I think, that whole thing about being judged, that still even comes in a different way. But, I just want to back up for a second too, because you mentioned too about where somebody said like that their husband doesn't get that they are into running. And I totally get that, because I think that sometimes men, I mean, I don't want to make it about men and women, but they do feel like they're used to things kind of revolving around them because we are caretakers.
Yeah.
So whether we like it or not, I mean, women, that's been our role for however long. So as mothers and wives and even daughters. So when it's kind of interesting that that's come up as a thing, because it's just like, it's almost like a jealousy, I think. And it's interesting that women can kind of take their power back by having a hobby or just having that space for themselves. So, And I had watched some other interviews with you, and there was something that you had talked about too when you, I guess you were working somewhere before you started this as a business, and then you had like a loss of identity.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear about that, because I think that's like a common thing. Like, and the reason why I bring that up also is because you had just mentioned too, where we do kind of like, women don't know what they want, or because we are caregivers naturally a lot of times, and we put ourselves second.
My work has always kind of defined me a little bit. Before I did the running stuff, it was my way of excelling and saying, look, this is how I'm different, and this is how I show up in the world. And I live in East London, which is where the London 2012 Olympics took place back in 2012. And so where I grew up is a massive part of my identity. And then this big global event turned up, and by some means I ended up working on it. And at that point I had no background in sport at all. I wasn't even interested in sport. And then I become this kind of go-to expert in East London around the Olympics. And for about 12 years, I was working on various projects all about the Olympics. And it just really blew my mind. It was around the same time that I got involved in the sport of running. And it was a massive part of my life. And then I got made redundant really, really quickly, like without any kind of prior warning. And I was pregnant with my daughter. So all of these things changed in an instant. My career, the dynamics of my relationship with my partner, the fact I was going to become a mum, all the things that I had, like my financial security, everything was up in the air. And I was like, who am I? I'd completely lost my sense of identity. So I lost my job, became a mum, had all this time on my hands, and I loved being a mum, and it was great to take the first year out of not really having to work. Well, I did need to work financially, but I just wasn't. But I completely lost my sense of identity. I didn't feel like I was excelling at anything. I wasn't excelling at being a mum. My relationship was crumbling around me. And the only thing that made me feel like I was making progress was running. So being able to get out of the house and do something that was just for me. And there was a lot of tension between me and my then partner, because I think he thought the running was for weight loss and, to get my body back. It wasn't about that at all for me. It was about being able to escape. It was about being able to be Julie again and not having to be mum. And people used to go, oh, do you run with your daughter in one of those buggies? And I'm like, no, I'm running to get away from her, which sounds awful as a mum, but I needed my space. I needed my own kind of way of being, and to be around, I enjoyed going to races so I could just talk to some other adults, where it wasn't all about being a mum. So I think, and then obviously being able to grow the business, that was just, financially, being able to be financially kind of independent again. The blog was an outlet. It was and in many ways it kind of sounds really dramatic, but I feel like it saved my life, because I would have gone into a really desperate kind of spiral of depression if I didn't have something that made me feel like I had a purpose. Because, some women feel like their children are their purpose. I've never really had that. I love my daughter dearly, and I do a lot of my work is about kind of providing for her, but it's not enough. For me personally, some women say having children is enough. For me, I feel I will always have to have some other outlet. Being a mum is not enough for me, and it took me a while to feel okay with that, to be okay with saying that, I don't really want to be a stay-at-home mum. because I am bored and I need to have some kind of creative outlet and to feel like I'm achieving goals that are about me, not just about being a mum.
Yeah, I think nurturing yourself too, though, when you do that and you take the time out to heal yourself, to go pamper yourself, I mean, besides the physical benefits of exercise, and I mean, in the whole endorphins and all of that kind of good stuff. I mean, just having that time out, you clear your head. Then when you come back to whatever you're doing, you have you're not scattered, and you can focus your attention and give more.
Yeah, and I really want to send a clear message to my daughter about the role of exercise in a woman's life, because I don't remember my mum really doing any sport other than when she was on some kind of fitness thing to lose weight. So she'd go on some kind of diet and then there'd be a fitness element. So I grew up thinking that the only reason you'd ever do sport is to lose weight. And I don't want my daughter to feel that. So we have a very active life. We run together, we go on bike rides. You know, I want her to feel like exercise is something that we do together as a family, and it's something that we enjoy. It's just part of our life. It's not because mummy's on a diet or that we're trying to control our weight in some way.
Yeah, and I actually think that's something that I've heard a little bit about too, that women of a certain age, like 40s and 50s, find it hard to find other women to work out with. They don't necessarily want to do it by themselves all the time. I mean, I enjoy my whole yoga at home thing, but I also belong to an online community where I take workshops online. And so it's a live event and it's great. I mean, it's so, so I may not be physically there with the other people, but we have this community. So I totally get that. Like, I love the internet. I just think that the world is just such a better place because of it.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that really kickstarted the business, actually, before I'd made any money on the business, was after having Rose and my daughter, I was too unfit to go and train with anybody else. I was literally couldn't run. And I was too embarrassed about how my body looked to go and train physically with other people. But I needed a goal. I needed to be able to have something to train for. So I set up something called One Big Fat Run, which was a virtual 5K. And it's been going now for 5 years, maybe longer than that. So the idea, and it all happened via Twitter. So basically on the last Sunday of every month, women from around the world would take part in One Big Fat Run. They'd run their 5K or walk their 5K, sometimes with a dog, sometimes on a treadmill, sometimes with the kids. It really didn't matter. And then we would post on social media and say, hey, I've just done my One Big Fat Run. And it was just this kind of, so we've probably had over 10,000 women take part in One Big Fat Run, and it still happens on the last Sunday of every month. And it is that thing about shared experience. Not everyone wants to physically train with somebody else, but they still want to feel like they're part of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think community is important. I think, the internet is wonderful, but it does kind of isolate us too. Like, we have this whole other issue with our phones when we're even out with other people. Sometimes people, defer to their telephone instead of the person. So that is definitely a kind of problem that we are experiencing now. But at the same time, and then you see these other kinds of things where I love that idea too. So I'm actually going to take part in that, because I've been thinking about, I used to be a runner, and I don't think I can run. I think I'll have to walk and run maybe to start, but I think I really liked it, and I worry a little bit about I think this is another kind of maybe an unrealistic thing, but I worry that, now that I'm getting older too, that maybe I would fall or something, like in the winter and stuff like that. So I guess, we can't help that. We're going to have some fears around things. But, and then, so your program is called Living a Bigger Life.
Yep.
And is that a membership community too? Is that, I know you said you did the one-on-one, a couple of them, but so is this, is that like an open enrollment all the time, or?
No, so it's a 12-week program. So the next program starts in September, but it's lifetime access. So you go through the program once, and then you get to stay in the community, and you can go through it as many times as you like with each new cohort. So it happens three times a year.
So yeah, and I will put all of that in the show notes for anybody who's listening. So
Perfect.
you'll be able to find the information about the books and the programs. And you also, do you still do the t-shirts? Because I know that you had started out, I think, as the kind of like your first product from your blog. And the t-shirts say "Too Fat to Run," right?
Yes. Yeah, we still do some t-shirts. We don't sell an awful lot anymore, but absolutely, when the business first started, that was how I made my money, because I wasn't really selling anything else. I had all these ideas of things I might sell, but I had to get a loan from the job centre because I was unemployed at the time, and the only way to get the loan was to offer something tangible, because when I talked about online training, they were like, what even is that? And they just couldn't see a business in that way. So I said, it's okay, I sell t-shirts. That's what I sell t-shirts. And then that they could understand. So literally for the first year or so, most, like 90% of my income come through the selling of t-shirts.
And then my last question before we close is, do you have one tip or word of advice for somebody who either wants to get started, or maybe somebody who used to do it, or even somebody who's been doing it? Like, what is the one thing that you think can help women in this quest for fitness and for a better life?
Yeah,
Living larger, a bigger life.
Yeah, I think it is around kind of scale. It's around setting yourself goals that change you. So often we think, oh, we've got to build up slowly. I'll just try and do it slowly. And it's a bit of I believe it's a little bit of a cop out when we go, oh, I'll just build up gradually and I won't commit to anything because I don't want to fail. And I actually believe, for me and for a lot of women that I've seen, by setting yourself a really big, scary goal, it forces you to up your game. It forces you to go out and buy new kit. It forces you to set yourself a program. It sets yourself to tell people what you're doing. You know, so often we set ourselves these tiny little goals and we don't tell anyone about them. And then if we don't achieve them, it doesn't matter because nobody knew anyway. So I'm a real believer in being audacious and getting out there and really grabbing life and going, actually, that's what I want, that big thing. And I don't know how I'm going to get there yet, but because of its scale, other people will go, that's pretty impressive, and they may be able to help. You know, like, I think if you say to somebody, oh, I'm going to train for a 5K, and it's not to take anything away from training for a 5K, because 5K is pretty awesome, but if you say to your friends, I'm going to do a marathon next year, they will go, wow, how can I help? How can I help? You know, and partners will say, okay, it's a big thing, I know I need to step up. You know, whereas when it's a small thing, it's so easy for people to dismiss it. When it's a big thing, we have to change to grow into that person that we need to be. So for me, it's always about setting a goal and then going, actually, is that the biggest version of the goal that I could do?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your time today to have this conversation. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners do too. And I wish you well. And are you planning on doing another marathon soon or anything, or is that something that's like, okay, not now?
I'm actually doing the New York Marathon in November.
Wow! So a whole trip and everything.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you again.
Been a pleasure.
You can find all of Julie's information in the show notes at consciouslife.guru. And if you're listening on YouTube, just check the details below. Thank you for staying tuned and sharing in our conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast feed and our YouTube channel. You can also find us on Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. Until next time, take care.